With the opportunity class or the OC exam coming up shortly, parents need to ensure that they apply to the correct schools for their child. As there are only two options that you could put down in terms of preferences, there is a degree of consideration that needs to be taken into account to maximize the chances for the student to actually get in, but also make reasonable and logical sense for them to actually change schools for Year 5 and 6. Let's get into it. The opportunity class is in certain government primary schools here in New South Wales, and they're catered to the most academically gifted Year 5 and Year 6 students with the highest potential. These classes help students learn by grouping them with other like-minded students who excel academically and are taught using specialized teaching approaches, educational materials, at a much higher standard. The biggest advantage here is that students who are generally a part of the OC class are covering content at a higher level. So they generally get an edge when entering high school and be in a much better position when going for the selective school exam. This is because there is a school component mark when they're going for this exam, and with the mark for both English and Maths being largely shaped up by the student's performance as well as the performance by their peers in that same cohort. That is why the OC class is so sought after. If the cohort is strong in the selective exam, then the school mark will be higher, as they know that the school assessments given at the school are generally more difficult. If the cohort is weak in the selective exam at a certain school, then the school mark will be lower, as they know that the school assessments given at that school are generally easier compared to other schools. This helps keep the school marks fair when compared across different schools and different students, as every school will have a unique teaching style and different teachers may mark differently. This same process is applied to a degree for both the HSC in Year 12 as well as the OC test due to scaling and moderation. This means that when students attend an OC class, they ultimately do get an advantage in the school mark component. And when students attend a selective class, they also get a bit of an advantage when doing the HSC. Although, how can parents choose the right OC school for their child? With only 2 choices available compared to 3 in the past, it makes the selection even more crucial. It does not change the fact that students are only offered placements according to the available vacancies and based on their ranking in the OC test compared to other applicants for a particular school. This means that even if you do try to be strategic and choose a historically easier school to get in terms of entry score, it won't matter if your child does not perform well in the exam. It will also not matter if it is too far away and it's not really practical for your child to even attend the school, among other factors. Out of the 2 school options, or the choices that you can actually put down, if your child qualifies for both, you will only be offered a place at your highest ranked school choice. So whichever school you put down first in terms of your preference, you will get an offer if your child is eligible academically. If you are offered the second school choice listed in your preferences, they may be placed on a reserve list for their first choice or be rejected for the first choice. Remember that the school options are your preferences for the school and not the academic ranking of the school. This is an important distinction that many parents, year after year, misunderstand. Let's say that an applicant lists 2 schools in the following order. Number 1, Blacktown South Public School, and number 2, Matthew Pearce Public School. And here's the scenario. If the child qualified for both Blacktown South and Matthew Pearce, they would only receive an offer from Blacktown South, which is the higher listed choice. This is despite Matthew Pearce being a higher academic school and having a higher entry score to actually get in. This is because of the preference order of the applicant. So now that we understand the process, what are the 4 factors that should be considered in conjunction with this? The first consideration would be entry-level score of the school. Although there has been talks that there will no longer be an entry score that is given to parents or be provided publicly, we can still use last year's entry score for schools that have been published. An easy way to check the score is simply to type in and search OC test scores for 2021 in Google. Even though the score that is publicly available at that time was out of 300 compared to the score that's now out of 120, it is still useful. This is because with this score, you would know which schools are harder to get in from a score perspective compared to others. Although keep note that this is the score from previously and are always subject to change. However, a 2021 score is still very recent and is still relevant for this year and a few years to come, and should definitely be incorporated in your decision making. So perhaps you may want to put a school down with a higher entry score as a first preference and a lower one for the second preference to increase your chances. So going back to my example, the minimum entry score for Matthew Pierce was 248 in 2021, while Blacktown South was 216. I may put down Matthew Pierce as my first choice and Blacktown South as my second to act as a bit of a safety net if I use only the entry-level score. The academic skill of your child will be the second consideration that I want to share. This is because even if you want to put a school that has a high entry score, it shouldn't even be put down if you know that your child is not at that level. This relates back to the CSS framework for the selective school system to help maximize your chances into getting a selective school. One of the components being there is self-awareness of your child's skill level. Once you do not put your child's interests in the forefront of your decision making and you let greed cloud you as a parent, that is the time when you should really be worried. Your chances of actually making it in will actually be slim or not very good at all. Although if your child's academic ability is not high, it doesn't matter which schools you put in, as you probably won't even make it into any OCs, as in order to get into an OC class, you have to be very gifted. However, given the test to go is still a very useful measure for parents to know how their child stacks up, especially if OC is not really the priority or the focus, and maybe selective instead is the goal rather than the OC. Thirdly, you also have a bit of time after the exam to change school options if needed as well, but keep in mind that the date that this is closed off changes year to year. For 2022, it is Sunday the 7th of August this year, which is the last time you can change school choices. You may want to see how your child found the exam and then adjust some of your choices in terms of preferences accordingly. So if they do the 3 exams, reading, mathematical reasoning, and thinking skills, but their feedback was that it was very tough and they had to even guess a few questions, or maybe they even had some questions they didn't answer, that is an indication you definitely want to adjust some of your school choices to be even lower in terms of entry score to make it even more feasible. This can be due to several reasons, such as if they were not prepared for the style of questions, or exam nerves, or they just found the test harder than what they originally prepared for. Parents can then change options, but there is a lot less flexibility you can do for OC compared to selective. For selective, I generally have an in-depth conversation with every student who is doing the exam with Bings Academy to gauge how they went in each section to sort of see if they should change some of these options. It does not work as well for OC since there's only 2 school options you can put down as preferences, and there are just a fewer schools available to choose from. But it doesn't hurt to have an expert outside opinion. So if the original school choices was Matthew Pierce and Blacktown South, but the student performed a lot worse than expected, you may want to make Blacktown South the first option and then put an even lower school in terms of entry score. Like the second option can then be Collington Public School instead of having Matthew Pierce there at all. Lastly, the final consideration will have to be the travel situation and transportation to actually attend the school. Some parents may think that they should actually put the highest ranked school just for the sake of it to maximize their chances of trying to get into a selective school. While this is true to an extent, and the better the OC class that your child actually goes to, it may help you more compared to a lower one, it should definitely not be the only consideration. This is because if the student has to travel over an hour just to attend the school and then over an hour back, it could mean that they have less time outside of school hours to do what they actually like to be doing, whether it be extracurricular or preparing for the selective exam. The benefit of an enhanced schooling experience may be offset if they have to travel a very long distance, or if it's just way too inconvenient. There needs to be an appropriate balance to ensure it truly does make sense and that it ticks the boxes for your individual situation. This is an even higher priority for some families that drive their child to school but has to get to work at a certain time. Even though some parents can work from home now, will they be able to drive a long distance to take their child to and from school, even though it is far away for both year 5 and year 6? There is a cost to it, whether you factor in the time to travel or the money in which you have to learn, or you could be doing if they were saving and doing something else during that time. That is why parents will choose an OC school that are solely within their local area or quite close to their local area, even though their child may be able to get into a higher ranked school. You may also be thinking, why doesn't the Department of Education restrict the schools people can choose based on their area then? Well, that is because for both opportunity class and for selective schools, students can only join through academic merit and not through catchment areas. Catchment areas can unintentionally discriminate based on where you live, and a family's financial situation can easily influence the type of public school that they'll be entitled to. This way, the Department of Education is approaching it the same. That is, if a parent and student is willing to travel a longer distance to school than what I would personally be comfortable with, that has an OC class, and they have the academically ability to actually get in, they are allowed to do so. This is a huge benefit for parents who are not financially well off and can't change their catchment area, but they are willing to allow their child to join these classes and help prepare them to succeed in the future, even if they do have to travel a little bit further out, or they have to change their working situation to adapt to the new change. All in all, students should also prepare for the exam as much as they can. The results of practice tests do not mean that the child will actually perform the same in the real exam, but it can be a bit of an indication in terms of factoring in which school choices and play a factor in helping them become more familiar with certain test questions that will appear. We know the process of the OC exam and that the order of the school choices matters in determining what school the student will be qualified for. The factors should be considered when putting these school preferences down have been explored in this video, and I truly hope it helps you assist with your decision-making process as your exam is just around the corner, especially if they're doing the exam this year. Regardless of whether they make it in or not, the goal generally is to make it into a selective high school rather than only making it into an OC class and not making it into a selective high school. So anyway, do not lose sight of it. As there is only one place for approximately every 6 people applying, not every student can be placed. There's physically not enough spots available. So be supportive and explain to your child that he or she can still be very successful at a mainstream primary school if they don't get in. However, this is definitely not an excuse for them to not try their best, because it is a huge advantage just for their life in the future if they do manage to put in the work in these earlier years. I hope you guys liked some of the considerations that I think should be important when parents are factoring in which school choices to choose for, in particular for the OC class. But if you disagree with anything, if you want to add another point to it, feel free to write it down in the comments below. Like this video if you haven't already. It helps with the YouTube algorithm and to help other students and parents find this video as well. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't too. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.